Over the course of the last 3 months, I've been putting together this Fluval Flex 15-gallon low-tech Planet aquarium for a first-time fish owner. Now, because they were a first-time fish owner, I wanted to make sure that the tank was simple to maintain, stable, and was going to be able to last a long time. But I also wanted them to get a lot of beauty and color out of the tank itself. Well, let me start off by saying that the Fluval 15 Flex itself is a nicely constructed tank. That front curved glass really flows well with that sleek black top. And it's got that lovely huge sump in the back for you to play with. But my one complaint on this tank is the stock light that comes with it. Unfortunately, the stock light itself isn't really a great light. It will grow plants, but it won't bring their full colors to your eye. Simply, it's missing that part of the light spectrum. This light is way too cool. And for me, I need to introduce a secondary light to it. Now, as you can see, the stock light is the straight light right here, where I have full whites and full reds activated. Now, snaking around is a secondary light that I've added to the tank. Now, this light really completes that color spectrum that the first light is missing. Let me show you the difference when I turn this light off. So as you can see, the tank looks very vibrant right now. But when I turn the light off, it's almost as if all the color was sucked right out of the tank. All of a sudden, the purples seem very drab. The oranges have nearly disappeared off of the Rotalas. The Nesaea just doesn't look that great. I know I'm going to butcher a lot of names in this video. Hang tight. The greens are just not popping as much as they were before. But let's turn that light back on. And all of a sudden, it looks like the same tank in HD. Now, this particular light, you can tune in on an app. And I will put a link below down to the particular light that I bought from Amazon down in the video description. So if you like this light, you can go ahead and get it. And I've tuned it in on the app to an orangey color, but not completely saturated. So we still have white coming through. I'll throw up on the screen exactly how I have the light tuned in on the app, just in case maybe you love this color as well. I thought it works really well. It makes the purples really vivid. It makes those yellows and green come forward nicely. So, you know, it adds a great color spectrum. But now let's get back to the tank itself. Now when it comes to the filtration, the sump back here is huge, which is great because I love biological stability. Whether I'm doing planted or unplanted, I really believe that having a strong bacterial base really eliminates a lot of problems that people encounter in aquariums. Now in the first chamber, I have actually put a sand bed down on the bottom so I can kind of have a little bit of anoxic conditions, get a little bit of anaerobic bacteria going, but there's also a secondary purpose why I put the sand bed in. This tank actually comes with 2 intake ports. Now, the original covers that come with them look like this. As you can see, the slots are pretty large. So if you're keeping something like cherry shrimp or small tetras or sporas, they're going to end up right in there. So I opted for these instead, which have much smaller slots, and you can actually get them off of Etsy. There are people on there who 3D print this stuff, and what I really like about this is this tank actually has a lot of 3D printed parts that you can buy for it. So you can get things like lid props, you can get things like different outlets, you can get, you know, all kinds of different things they've 3D printed for this tank. So it's kind of nice the ways you can modify it. But like I said, what I did is I covered up that bottom inlet because I only wanted the top. And that top inlet, I switched to, you know, something a lot thinner. Now in that chamber, besides the sand bed on the bottom, I have a lava rock stacked all the way up to the top. Lava rock is very porous, and so allows aerobic bacteria to exist on it. Now, eventually, anaerobic bacteria can also exist on lava rocks, which is nice. I've always operated on the theory that you should have more surface area available to the bacteria than the bacteria that you actually need. If you have less surface area than the bacteria you need, then you run out of places for them to grow, and they'll never be able to achieve the colony size they need to operate your aquarium properly. Now, if you're putting lava rock in the filter, what is important is that you at least use 3/4 inch stone, I would say. 1 inch stone is fine too. What it comes down to is you want nice gaps like this between them, so water can always nicely flow through it. You don't want to use a very small grit or a very small lava rock, and then they all compact on each other, and once they get dirty, water, it chokes the water flow. You don't want this. So use nice larger lava rocks if you want to go this way. Now, for the middle chamber, on the top, there is a sponge provided by Fluval, and it has 2 openings in it, and Fluval provides you with their biomax to put into one, and in the second, they give you carbon. Now, I didn't really want either of these things, so I actually switched one to lava rock, and the second one I switched to Biohome Ultimate, which I really, really like. I just happen to have some lying around from other projects. It actually does work very well. It harbors aerobic and anaerobic bacteria extremely well. A lot of the tanks that I use this with really do operate with 0 nitrates without the need of plants or water changes, essentially. It's good stuff. I just happen to have some lying around. You could always just use lava rock or the biomax that they've provided. Now, underneath that is a void, and I have also decided to stuff it with more lava rock. Okay, so I want to make sure that my bacterial colonies have lots and lots of room. All right. Now, in the third chamber sits the pump. Now, the pump provided by Fluval for this particular tank, I believe, is way too powerful. This is the tank that Fluval has provided, and this is the pump that I bought off of Amazon. This pump does 90 gallons per hour. I'm not exactly sure how many gallons per hour this pump does, but it is quite powerful even on its low setting. This pump I really like because it came with the right sized shank for the tube back there. So essentially it's plug and play. You don't have to replace the tube. You don't have to play around with, all different kinds of stuff. And this is the pump I pulled right off of Amazon. I think it was $10. By the way, the lights I think were like $25. So, I'll leave the link right in the description in case maybe you're looking for the same pump. I happen to keep mine on the low setting. That's me personally. Now, the outlet for the filter, I actually decided to just remove completely. So I have a big open hole essentially back there. I may add a grate or something over time, but really I don't think anything, if much, is going to go in there. Now, let me talk about the water really quick in this tank. The water I've remineralized from distilled water. I did not want to start with tap water. Tap water has too many problems, I find. I did aquarium maintenance for people, and going from house to house, I will say some of the water around here is quite toxic. You'll have water that has almost nearly perfect parameters for keeping plants, but you can't keep Java moss alive. You can't keep anything alive. You can't keep certain fish alive. I mean, you have to worry about herbicides, pesticides, heavy metals. Who knows what else is in there? So, if you're doing a smaller tank, I definitely recommend you remineralize the water. If you're doing a 3 gallon, if you're doing a 5 gallon, a 10 gallon, 15 gallon, even up to a 20 gallon, once you start going to like 30, 75, 40s, it gets a little expensive, or you may want an RO unit at that point. But I do like remineralizing water. I find it causes less problems. Personally, out of my tap, it comes out like 7.0 pH, 4 kH, and 6 GH. I cannot keep cherry shrimp alive on the stuff. I cannot. TDS is something like maybe 215. But the moment you remineralize the water and just start from distilled, no problems. So a lot of problems, whether they're plant, or fish or shrimp or snail, whatever the case may be, a lot of them I find are just attributed to the source water. So I remineralize. Now, personally, I went with Seachem. I started off with equilibrium for the GH. Now, for 5 gallons, I add 5.33 grams. Then I add the alkaline buffer, which I add 1.2 grams of to 5 gallons. And then to wrap it up, I add the acid buffer, 0.6 grams for 5 gallons, which gets me a water of around, I believe, like a 6.8 pH, 3 kH, and 5 GH? Maybe 4 GH. Something around that. It's reasonable parameters. It's parameters that I've liked. I mean, this is just the formula I've been following for quite a while. For my 20 gallon, I decided to use the same type of water for this tank, and it seems to be working very, very well. The plan on this tank is it's probably going to get maybe a gallon change per month, or maybe 2 gallons a month. I don't know. We'll see, depending on, what kind of fish and everything, what the future holds. Now, as far as how the tank is set up, the substrate, I decided to do a few layers here. To begin with, on the bottom, I add a sprinkle of carbon and a sprinkle of calcium carbonate sand. Not too much, just a sprinkle, as if you were spicing something. If you put too much or too little, it's probably perfectly fine. Now, on top of that, I have about a 1/4 inch of silica sand running from end to end, every end of the aquarium. It's just to add a little bit more of an anoxic bed. Any sand at that depth is going anoxic, so it doesn't take much. Okay, I used about a 1/4 inch of just silica sand. You don't want to use calcium carbonate sand. Now, you want to use maybe a little sprinkle at the bottom to counteract the acidic conditions that form over time in these layers, but for the main layer, I would like to use silica sand, okay, because it's non-reactive and it's just more surface area for the bacteria to grow on. Above it, I have fluorite running from front to back in the aquarium. In the front is 2 inches of fluorite. In the back is 3 inches of fluorite. And what I do like about fluorite is that, unlike the aqua soils, which give you your nutrition up front and then lose that nutrition over time, fluorite's a bit of the reverse, where you're not getting too much up front, but then you're going to get more over time as it breaks down, as things like bacteria and microfauna really start to chew at that stuff at the root, and the roots start to it starts to break apart and nutrients start become available. So I really like fluorite for that aspect, and in the longevity sense of things. You can have a tank operating for a decade, more, 2 decades on fluorite. It's amazing stuff. I love fluorite. On the top, I did aqua soil. I decided to use controsoil. What I really like about controsoil is that it lasts an extremely long time. I have tanks that have been running 5, 6, 7 years with controsoil, and it almost looks as fresh as when you took it out of the bag. There isn't much decay going on. I also have a tank with Amazonia, and the Amazonia has turned to powder. I mean, that tank is quite old. But after about a year, especially 2 years, I mean, it is just gone to powder. It breaks apart. It makes a mess. It turns into a catastrophe. It's very fertile stuff up front, I will say. It does a fantastic job growing plants. Controsoil does a good job of growing plants. But as far as the longevity game goes, I like controsoil much, much better. So I went with controsoil. In the front, I have 1.5 inches on top of the 2 inches of fluorite, so we have 3.5 inch layer in the front. And in the back, I have 2.5 inches of aqua soil on 3 inches of fluorite, so we have 5.5 inches in the back. I'm a huge fan of deep beds. I love anoxic filtration. I love microfauna. I love my copepods, my ostracods, my detritus worms. I like all that stuff that lives down there. In nature, when you start poking around the ponds and the streams, what you'll find a lot of the time is a lack of plants. Because nature has done a very, very good job of filtering the water with essentially just this Nature doesn't use this all the time. Sometimes nature uses plants, but a lot of the time, the filtration is right here, with aerobics, anaerobics, other biological processes that are happening. So it's nice if you can flow with nature instead of against it. Now that I got my substrate in, how did I make this tank? The first thing I did was cycled it. A normal bacterial cycle. Unplanted. I'm a firm believer that the aquarium should be cycled before it is planted. Why do I believe this? Well, in the beginning stages of an aquarium, levels, everything's going all over the place. I mean, it's like a roller coaster ride inside the tank. So it's better to leave the plants out of the equation until the bacteria has stabilized. I also find that there is almost this competition in the beginning between plants and bacteria. And so I like to make sure that the bacteria get in there, stabilize themselves nicely, and then I plant. And I find that alleviates a lot of those beginning problems in a planted aquarium where your plants are essentially fighting against, brown algae, all kinds of different algae. It's a chaos inside of an aquarium before it biologically cycles. So I biologically cycle it. Now I did it for a week. Really I wanted to do it for 2 weeks at the minimum, but I needed to put a carpet in, so I jumped on the carpet after the first week. Ideally you would like to let it cycle for about 2 weeks. Now if you are cycling a tank that doesn't have any plants and doesn't have any fish, you can take that temperature up to about 84 degrees, 85 degrees, okay? Just make sure that you have ample oxygen in the water. Make sure you're having great circulation if you're taking the temperature that high. But what we will find is that the tank will cycle extremely quickly versus if the tank is at 74 degrees. It is night and day. You almost half the time by doing this. Once you put plants in, you don't really have this option anymore. I mean, taking it to 84 degrees, I'd lose a lot of my plants and I'd lose a lot of my color out of this tank. Not something I want to do. So once you get that tank biologically cycled, then I like to plant it. Now, in this case, I went with the plants Monte Carlo for the front because it is a low-tech tank. There is no CO2. So I wanted to pick something that will grow rather well and will make a nice tight carpet. And Monte Carlo, I felt, was the best choice for that. Now you do have to be careful with Monte Carlo because Monte Carlo can get quite invasive. This Monte Carlo is actually starting to climb the rocks, so I may want to trim that back because what you don't want is it intermixing with the bucephalandras up here, because then it becomes a mess to detangle these things. Which brings me to the bucephalandras. Now, I did put a lot of work into this tank, so I put a 2011 brownie ghost in the corner here, and what a beautiful plant it has been in this tank. It has anchored itself in very, very nicely. It's grown a couple leaves. I'm happy with it. Now these are Anubius petite, which I took out of one of my tanks. These are a few years old, but they've really taken a liking to this tank, so I'm happy with how those turned out. There is a black angel bucephalandra here, which I unfortunately cut a bit short, so it's got like one leaf on it. It'll bounce back, it'll take a while, which is unfortunate because that is actually, I think, my favorite bucephalandra with its holographic blue leaves. I mean, what other plant could do that much blue? Oh, maybe the brownie ghost. Moving on, we have the golden bucephalandra, which is just an eye catcher, right where it is, right in the center. I mean, it really does make its presence known against the Monte Carlo or the Anubius. Its green really pops. It's a little bit, I think, more of a pastel color, but it's very nice. And then I believe we have some Leto bucephalandras and some other assorted bucephalandras here. They've got mixed, I forget some of the names. Okay, moving on to the stems over here. Over here right in the front we have golden Nesaea, and I'm sure I'm going to butcher a lot of names during this, so hang tight. So we have golden Nesaea, which I love. It's a slow growing plant, and one of my goals for this tank was not to have to put your hands in here too often other than feeding the stock, so it was a lovely choice. Now what is interesting is one of them is actually green. I've been growing this plant for years and I put it in this tank. Well, No, it was actually green when I took it out of my 20-gallon tank. And I put it in this tank. At first I thought it was a deficiency. But now I'm looking at it, I believe it has actually become its own variant, in a sense. Its stem is thicker. It's growing taller than the yellow ones. It's kind of cool. It's almost like watching evolution in process, where you could see, you know, a variant of a certain species out competing the other variant. It's fascinating. Now, moving on to the back left corner, we have Rotala Yarabje. I'm not sure if I said that right. Now, I wasn't sure what this plant was going to do in this tank. Now, I've kept it in high-tech parameters, but I haven't kept it in low-tech parameters. Now, it is a pretty good-looking plant. I'm pretty sure I can get a little more color out of it, maybe a lot more color out of it. I just need to maybe play around with the parameters a little bit, maybe with the fertilizer a little bit. Now, as far as fertilization with this tank, I do keep it very lean. Okay, maybe it gets like half a squirt of flourish every week and a half. So I'm trying to keep it very lean. Yeah, the nitrates are writing 0 all the time. They're fine. They actually don't need that many nitrates to operate. But what I like about the Yarabje is that it actually has these flat ends to its leaves instead of having a point like a lot of the other Rotalas do. So it's a very interesting, geometrically speaking, a very interesting looking little plant. It is nice. It's a nice bush-looking plant, so I like the way it worked out. Next to it is Bacopa salzmannii. This is the purple variety, which I grow in my 20-gallon, which the leaves are a lot bigger, the stems are a lot thicker. Believe it or not, I like this purple better than what grows in my 20. I think what grows in my 20 is a little darker purple, and I kind of prefer this lighter purple on a personal level. But it's a really beautiful tank, and it makes the plant, and it makes the tank really pop. Honestly, I didn't know what the plant was going to do going in, because I really haven't kept in low-tech conditions before. But honestly, it turned out beautifully. All the growth that you actually see from these stems all came from this tank. Okay, all those old bits from old tanks have already been thrown away. So all this is brand new growth. Now, finally, one of my favorite plants, which is the Sunset Hygro, which is in the right corner. Now, I love the Sunset Hygro. It has that hot pink tips, you know, moving back to kind of like a more pastelish kind of pink, and those pastel green leaves with the white veins on them. I mean, when you have your parameters just right, and you got the dosing just right, the leaves on that particular plant almost look as if they were painted on. I mean, it is a fantastic plant. Fantastic plant. Now, the plants are important. Now, when I added the plants, I also added microfauna. What I added was copepods, ostracods, detritus worms, and really what else was in the syringe. I just go to an old tank, I go into the bed, I suck some stuff out, some detritus. There's always eggs in there. You don't have to worry about getting the copepod. There's copepod eggs in there. You don't have to worry about getting the ostracod. There's ostracod eggs already in that most of the time. So when you suck it out, you usually got a whole bunch of stuff. And I injected it in the tank. And when the brown algae came, you know, the copepods helped a lot, and their population boomed, which is expected. And then it went away. You know, and I also put in some snails. So the way I'm planning this tank essentially is I'm building from the ground up. We start with those bacteria. We move on to things like the copepods, the ostracods, the detritus worms, you know, the plants, the snails. We want that lower part of the food chain to build. Once that's nice and stable, we move on to the next part of the food chain, which in this case is probably going to be cherry shrimp or blue dream shrimp, or I'm not sure what color, but a neo shrimp. So the next part will probably be neo shrimps. And once their colony is established, once that population is nice and solid, then we move up to the next chain, which would be your predators. So that's when, although that's still up in the air, it is looking like maybe Chilean Rasbora, maybe some Batis. I'm not sure yet. I'm always open, so if you guys have any suggestions, feel free to leave them down in the comments as far as what fish you think might work for this tank best. I'm always open to suggestions. Alright, so this is the tank after 3 months. I hope you enjoyed an explanation on how I put this tank together and what I use to put this tank together, what principles I use to put this tank together. And if you have any questions, please put them down in the comments, and I'm going to try my best to answer what I can. Alright, thank you guys, and bye for now.